everybody. Welcome to Barclay Damon's Labor and Employment Podcast. I'm Rosemary Enright. I'm broadcasting live from Studio B in Buffalo, New York, joined as always by my partner in crime and better half, Mike Sciotti.
Yeah, everyone. I don't know about better half.
Well, but thank you all for joining us. This is the second part of our episodes discussing the employee handbooks in 2026. So we're going to continue on from there. But before we do that, Mike, you ready for your question?
Yeah, sometimes I fear these now because I don't know what you're going to ask.
That's right. All right. So the question, it's kind of a play. So on our last call, we talked about, your most memorable meal.
Yeah.
So this time the question is, what was your best meal?
I know that too. All right. So I will preface this by saying I'm a chicken parm snob, and I take my chicken parm very seriously. In Jamaica, I had the best chicken parm I have ever had, and I could not believe it. And I just said, if you told me the best chicken parm I would ever have is on a beach eating dinner in Jamaica, I never would have believed you. And I told the waitress, I said, tell the chef I'm a chicken parm snob and this is the best chicken parm I've ever had. The chef actually came out and talked to me. He's like, really? I said, yes, really.
That is crazy, Mike. I can't imagine you're in Jamaica where it's warm, the palm trees are blowing, and you're eating spaghetti parm or chicken parm. Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny. I love chicken parm. I'm not a chicken parm snob, but I do love a chicken parm. All right. So for me, my best meal, I'm just trying to think. I guess, so here's what I say. I'm going to give a plug for the French Laundry out in wine country. So this was forever ago, and it was my first time ever having a meal like that. So if for those of you, if you've never been to the French Laundry, it is multiple courses. The menu is set. It's whatever was good at the market that day. It's Thomas Keller is the chef, and I'd never had a meal like that before. And it was like a life-changing experience. So I can't recommend, as I reflect back now, I couldn't recommend it enough. That was forever ago. So it's still, I'm sure, wonderful. But I'd say that would be mine. So, all right. So with that said, I'm thinking about food now, Mike. Let's get into it. So for those of you, hopefully you listened to the previous episode. So we kind of teed up employee handbooks in general and that. So Mike and I talked, and there's so much to talk about with employee handbooks, but we thought, for this episode, we want to focus on two areas, right, Mike? So we're thinking we want to talk about the policies in your handbook that discuss accommodations in the workplace. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about. And then the second thing we want to talk about are your leave policies. So, for example, in New York State, your New York State paid family leave, your New York State paid sick and safe leave, your FMLA or Family and Medical Leave Act. So leave under that. So those are the two topics we're going to focus on in this particular episode, and more specifically, how you are going to document or represent them in your handbook. Because as Mike said at the end of our last episode, obviously we want to educate our employees, but we also have to have that first line of defense, right? So we've got to say, yeah, we have a policy that shows X, Y, Z. It also helps our HR department and our supervisors and managers to understand how to manage their people when someone comes to them and says, I need an accommodation or I need time off for this reason. So we want to make sure everybody understands what that is, that it is clearly documented, and so that it can be hopefully uniformly enforced. So with that said, Mike, let's talk about accommodations. Tell me, I know what I like to do in an employee handbook relative to an accommodation policy. tell me, what do you like to see?
Yeah, I like to see in this day and age now, it's more than just disability accommodation. So I think the best practice is you have an accommodation policy, and within it there are subtypes: disability, religion, domestic violence, and pregnancy. Those are the what I call the big four that I think you need to call out. Also, just as a side note, I know we had discussed in the previous podcast the sexual harassment prevention policy. Believe it or not, there's an accommodation provision sort of hidden in there relative to where employees are interviewed. And I think in some substance it says interview them someplace they feel safe. So I view that as an accommodation, but it's in the sexual harassment policy. So I think you call out each of these four areas, and you tell the employee, hey, if you needed a disability accommodation, this is who we want you to go to. You sort of just lay out a simple procedure. Don't get into 40 different layers of explanation, because then I think you are overeducating your employees. I believe the HR folks should handle the accommodation requests. So most likely that's who it would be in the handbook. But a lot of times they might go to their supervisor first. And I think the supervisors need to understand how the accommodation policy works, and to tell the employee, you need to go see so-and-so in HR. And then I would have that supervisor follow up with HR. Hey, Jane came to see me on a pregnancy accommodation. I told her to go see you. We've actually litigated cases, Rosemary, where the supervisors went rogue against the policy and said, well, I can figure out what the accommodation is, and denied everything, and it turns into liability. I think it's very important that you centralize the request, because the rules are a little different. I mean, disability, we might be able to get medical records. We might be able to get have the physician or healthcare provider respond to a request from us. We might even be able to get the employee examined by our physician. I don't want to put any of that in a policy because the rules are, it's a case-by-case basis. But I do want to centralize who gets those, and that person needs to be properly trained on how to handle an accommodation request.
Yeah. And Mike, if I could just interrupt you for a second, talking about, you've talked about, that you've litigated, and you were talking about the accommodation. So we actually had a case, and that, the supervisor was asked, well, when was the last time you were trained on the accommodation policy? Well, first they asked the supervisor, does the company have a policy? And their response was, I think so. Okay, not a good answer. Bad answer. And then the question was, all right, well, so do you know what to do if someone comes to you? And they said, well, I think I'm supposed to send them to HR. And then the question was, well, did you follow up with HR to make sure? And so I as you were saying that, I wanted to make that point, because, our listeners may be sitting there thinking, oh, well, our supervisors have the handbook and that, but if you end up in a situation where you're sitting in a room and someone's being deposed, right? And they're asking, and their question is, well, yeah, I think we have a policy, or I'm not sure where it was, or I don't remember when I was trained, or, well, they're supposed to go to HR. And then they also ask, well, what does HR do? Because again, when they get that request, they need to understand how this process works. They need to understand what the interactive process is. And that's so important. And while all of that is not in the policy in the handbook, still that handbook and that, that accommodation. And I love what you said, the big four, because I agree. That's what I advise my clients to do. That's also a reminder every year when we distribute that handbook, which is what we talked about in the last episode. It's also an opportunity to retrain, re-educate, remind our supervisors about this policy and what they have to do. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you because you were talking about the accommodations.
No, that's a great point, because I was going to make a very similar point. You have to train, you have to do the sexual harassment prevention training once a year. Segregate your supervisors out, train them separately, and throw in other stuff: accommodations, code of conduct, discipline forms, leave. Make sure they understand the process and how it works. Just because they will be questioned in a worst case scenario. And I don't know, may not be a great answer, or I think maybe we have a policy. Those are simply bad answers. And they need to understand the process and be able to articulate it in the case there's employment litigation. So just have a training day. You've already lost half the day anyways on sexual harassment. So just have a training day. And I actually had one of my clients, they have a training boot camp. It's 3 days a year for their supervisors, all day. And it's all employment-based training. And I was, when I did it, I was just like, wow, I wish everyone did this. But that is the best case scenario, Rosemary, to really, really hit home the key stuff, because they have to know what it means. And another thing, I've seen some of these accommodation policies that says you have to fill out this form. No, they don't. All they have to do is ask verbally. You can encourage them to fill out the accommodation form, or you could fill it out for them if they have refused to, sort of like the sexual harassment complaint form. But to say, I don't have to process this unless you fill out my form, is dead wrong. And the EEOC and Division of Human Rights will be all over you, because that is incorrect.
Yeah. So, okay, so back to the accommodations policy. So that's for, disability, Mike. So let's talk about the others. You mentioned the big four. So go to number 2.
Number 2, religion. Employees are allowed to ask for religious accommodation. New York has accommodation rules in place that basically say, hey, this is how you sort of handle it. These are some of the factors you look at. But the reality is, an employee can ask for a religious accommodation for sincerely held religious beliefs. And that's a wild card. I was brought up a Roman Catholic, so I know those rules. But if someone was to say, Mike, can you tell me what the rules for Judaism is? Not a clue. So you have to get a handle on some religious aspects. And, the rule of thumb I go by, Rosemary, is this: unless you have a reason to disbelieve the employee, believe them that it is a sincerely held religious belief. And the other thing, we think of religion and Protestant, Catholic, Methodist, the bigger religions that have the majority of people. But in New York, especially, religions can be a lot of things. And I say this in all seriousness. Here's some of the more unique ones. Vampirism, recognized religion. You may think, well, that's just stupid, Mike. Well, I didn't make the rules. I don't believe it, but there are people who legitimately do. One of my favorite is the Church of the Pastafarians, and they worship pasta. And you may say, this is now becoming a joke. Maybe. And then my all-time...
You might fall in that one with your chicken parm. But,
yeah. But my favorite one is Jediism from Star Wars. And believe it or not, I think it's England, is where the biggest number of Jedis are. It's like 250,000 people believe in Jediism in England. You have to prepare your supervisors not to laugh because it's one of the more difficult things. You get, if I need the Sabbath off. That's one thing. They probably can relate to that. But you need to train them on some of this other stuff, because the worst thing that you could have is someone that believed in vampirism asks for a reasonable accommodation and is laughed at because they're not taking it seriously. And Rosemary, I have to say this one story because it just happened about a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
2 individuals who were practicing members of the vampirism religion asked for religious accommodation. They only wanted to work at night. And we were only open to 5 o'clock. And we said, no, we don't have to keep the establishment open and adjust your shift to allow you to work at night. And I can tell you the chuckle between the HR director and me was pretty intense, but you can't do that in front of the employee because they will hold it against you. If you say it, act out, roll your eyes, all those things can be used against you. The third one that we see is domestic violence.
And Mike, actually, interrupt you for a second, if I could. So, so just as you referenced the hidden accommodation within the sexual prevention, so I don't know if I'd call this hidden, but what I'd say is when we're talking about religion and we're talking about handbook policies, a lot of employers have a dress code policy. And so you should always, always in your dress code policy include, so the last statement in every one of the policies that I have reviewed and or drafted for employers is that the company will afford or offer reasonable accommodations for disabling conditions and for sincerely held or for religious beliefs. And you may think, well, why does that come up under the dress code, Rosemary? Well, because there are certain faiths that there are certain articles of clothing. So, for example, a hijab or a burqa, or a gentleman might with the beards. And so an employer may say, well, with this particular position, you need to be able to do X, Y, Z, and that beard could be problematic. Or individuals who may have the long braids and that. So there are all different reasons that may be related to the dress code. So we always want to have that sentence in that policy. So again, you wouldn't necessarily have it, you've got your accommodation policy with the big 4 in it, but you've also got to take care of it in the sexual prevention and also in the dress code policy. So I don't know.
Yeah, I would add just a little bit because just to expand on what you said, the other reason sometimes we deny accommodations is it causes a safety concern. Yeah. So let's say I have a sincerely held religious belief. I want to wear this particular chain, but I'm also working in a manufacturing facility with lots of moving parts that go like this. I'm okay to say, I'm sorry, you have to remove that necklace because it creates an unsafe work condition for yourself and others. And that sometimes becomes the source of litigation. But safety is paramount. Under the ADA, you're allowed to protect the employee from themselves or from hurting others. You don't have to wait. So, I mean, there's so much that goes into this, and I know I'm sure we'll talk in a future podcast about accommodations, more specifically, more in depth. But the policy really is required and is your front line of defense.
Right, exactly. So anyway, so I just wanted to throw that in there, Mike, because we had mentioned, the hidden one in there. So, okay, so domestic violence. Go ahead.
Domestic violence. And it's only been a protected class here in New York maybe for 10, 15 years now, maybe a little more than that. But the reason is this: we were having ex-boyfriends or crazy husbands show up at work causing problems, and that the person was getting fired because of the drama in the workplace. So one of the things that the government did is they added domestic violence as a protected class. And when they did that, they put in accommodation rules. So, just so as a for instance, I can use unpaid leave to go meet with a DA who's prosecuting my abuser. I can go meet with a counselor or a healthcare provider. I can, and we'll talk in a second. That's also sick and safe leave, but it's also an accommodation. So it's important that your supervisors know this, and also do not think of domestic violence accommodations as a accommodation for a female only. It is not. It can also just as easily be a male who is being abused, and it could be a male being abused by a male, a female. We don't know. So don't, I've had some supervisors make a lot of stupid comments, and they just need to be trained not to, but they need to know, who do we hand this off to? We want you to go see so-and-so in HR. They need to independently follow up with HR. And maybe even the best practice is walk them down to HR and say, I took it so serious, I brought Jane and went right into HR. And, it's just protect your employees, and you'll never go wrong if you err on the side of that through supervisor conduct. But so domestic violence is very important, and the last one is pregnancy. It under the old ADA rules, was pregnancy even a disability? And a lot of courts said no, it's not. And what we've seen is a development of that over the years, both under the ADA, the human rights law, where now it should be commonplace. Of course, it's a normal bodily condition. You're pregnant, okay. I need simple things. I need more bathroom breaks. I need water at my desk. I need an extra chair to put my feet up on. Those should be no-brainers for employers, and you want to encourage employees to make those requests. And also, there's nothing wrong with a supervisor going to a pregnant female. You need anything? It just shows you care. So that's the last of them. But again, each of them would have like a general description and who to go to, and you need to tie that in with your supervisory training, just so the supervisors know how to handle these things.
Right. So you don't get that bad answer of, well, I think. Right.
Yeah, not only that, but so that they don't do anything stupid. And because this is what when I do management training, Rosemary, I tell all the managers this: think whatever you want. Don't say it, and don't put it in writing, because once you do those two things, it's an admission. So you may think, the vampire comes to you, I need an accommodation. I only want to work at night. I know my first reaction was to chuckle. It really was. But if I was the HR professional or supervisor, that is the worst possible thing that you can do. And it's an admission and will be used against you. So they need that training on poker face. I tell the supervisors, listen, you don't need to answer the question. You don't need to come up with the accommodation. You just need to know what to do with it. And that's key. And that's why we have these policies.
Right. Exactly. So, and to your point, Mike, I think we'll do a whole episode on, the interactive process. Yeah. So, all right. So that's the accommodation policy. So let's just spend a few minutes talking about the leave policy. So paid family leave in New York SIP, paid sick and safe, and our FMLA. So what do you think? So in terms of policies, what do you want to see relative to those?
So let's start with sick and safe and sort of go from there. First, you have to figure out what your requirement is. And that's tied into how big you are, and in some cases, how much gross income you have. So that's step number one. The state does have a model policy, but you can fine tune it. So are we going to front load? Are we going to use the accrual method? Are we going to let them accrue more than the minimum for the year? Are we going to let them use more leave? These are questions we have to answer because we want to draft a proper policy. And, you can have multiple classes. Like I've seen policies where the executives are front loaded and the rank and file are accrued. And that's fine. We just have to define who has it. It will cause some workplace issues and drama from time to time, but you need to get an understanding of that before we draft the policy. And you can be creative. We don't have to pay out sick leave when an employee resigns. Maybe, I just did a collective bargaining agreement where we said, if you've been here over 5 years, we'll pay out 50%. If you've been over here over 10 years, 75%. If you've been here 15 years or more, we'll pay out 100% of your unused sick time. We wanted to motivate people to stay with us. And that was one small way to do so. So you can be very creative with your sick and safe policy. But what I find, Rosemary, is that a lot of employers just take the state's policy and plop it down and don't really think it through. So to me, it's very important, and you are required to have a policy. And there are ways in there to motivate employees to stay with you, and use it creatively. So I think that's important, and it's not only just, I think I'm talking to the choir here. It's sick leave is for you and a family member. It could be as simple as, I need a mental health day. I'm exhausted. That's a sick day. All right. Yep. What if I catch someone abusing a sick day? Well, you can discipline them. If you're right. I tell people, you better be right. You better be right. But it's something you need to think through. And New York State Department of Labor, you won't find this, Rosemary, in the law, the regulations, or the guidance. You are allowed to pay out sick leave at the end of the year. They buried it in a comment in the regulations. And the first time I heard that, I was screaming at the Department of Labor saying, there's no such regulation or law. Well, and then they showed me where it was, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Right. And it's at the employee's option. So you can be creative. There's that rule out there that's very well hidden. And I did hear from the department that they're thinking about changing that and getting rid of that, but they haven't done so yet. So again, take some time, develop it. And you can have just a 1 hour phone call with us or your HR consultant and say, hey, let's go. How can we be creative with a sick leave policy? Because you can be. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'd say probably, I don't know that I have anything to add to that other than to say we should probably do an episode that talks about New York paid sick and safe leave. And, some of the things to watch out for. We won't do it here because we're just talking policies and a handbook, but the single bucket versus, having a separate bucket for your sick time and your paid time off. And to your point, what happens at the end of the year, I know about that comment you're talking about, and it's so confusing to employers, but we can do that in another. But so we have the sick and safe leave. And then, the other required policy, of course, Mike, is the New York State paid family leave.
Yeah. And this one, I think question one is, are you self-insured or do you have a carrier? And that sort of dictates the tone of the policy, because there would be no references to an insurance carrier if you're self-insured, because it's you. So, we just go through, the state has a policy. I would use the state's policy, but again, we fine tune it. So there's potentially waiting periods for short-term disability, and there are things that we can work in through sick leave and paid family leave to cover any gaps. So maybe they're out on paid family leave, but they have this huge bucket of sick time or PTO, whatever it may be called. Can we let them supplement? And those are things that we can work into that. And I will also just add one thing, which I failed to say initially. Under the labor law, you are required to put in writing all your PTO/vacation. It must be in writing. There's no option in that regard, and that also includes sick time, which is in a couple different places mandated. But I'd use the state's policy, Rosemary, and basically it just explains the procedure, but the procedure will differ depending on if you have a carrier or you're self-insured.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And I don't think I have anything to add to that either. And I'm watching our time, Mike, and I want to be respectful. We have people who are listening to us, whether they're at the gym, on the treadmill, and they've got 30 minutes, or they're walking the dog. So just quickly, FMLA, so Family and Medical Leave Act, another policy that you want to have in your handbook. But thinking back to what we talked about last time, Mike, coverage. All right. Are you even an eligible, or rather covered, employer under FMLA? First question you got to ask yourself, but I'll let you take it.
Yeah, if you're covered, you must have one. If you're not, don't. Don't have the FMLA poster up. Don't mislead your employees into thinking you're FMLA covered when you are not. The magic number is typically 50 or more for private sector employers, and there are entities that are automatically covered, like the government and things like that, where they're covered regardless of the size. So let's assume you've determined you must have a FMLA policy. There is a policy that the Department of Labor has, which is very long, that I recommend people use. That's what we do, and you fine tune it to your company and what you do. And the key on all these leave policies is that they interact with each other. Make sure when you're developing them, they interact. And so you don't want to leave people hanging, but don't mislead your employees into thinking you're FMLA covered if you're not. And I would say, Rosemary, never subject yourself to FMLA unless you are FMLA covered. Yeah. Well, if you're a smaller employer and you want to have a FMLA-like policy, call it an unpaid leave policy on application. And so you can do it on a case-by-case basis. You don't want to have to follow the FMLA regulations, which are like 60 pages long, single space, small print. Don't do that. But it's okay to create some other policies. So the rule of thumb here is make sure you know what you have to have it, fine tune it, and make sure they interact correctly with each other. The worst thing that you can do is have them not interact properly with each other.
Right, exactly. And so just to put a fine point on that for our listeners. So, for example, someone may be taking New York State paid family leave to care for a family member, right? Well, that also qualifies under FMLA. So if you're a covered employer under FMLA, those two are going to interact, right? Absolutely. So you want to have that in there. And to Mike's point, New York State paid family leave. Are you going to permit your employees to supplement with their PTO or some of their sick time? So all of those policies interact. And so that's why it's so important, as Mike and I said in the last episode, you redistribute every year, give it a look over every year to make sure you've got those interactions correct. Or, more actually, I should use my words better, Mike. A lot of times, an employer will go in and change, for example, their PTO policy or a single policy and forget about the fact that it interacts with all of these other policies. And those three in particular, your PTO, which we're not talking about now in the interest of time, but your sick, your paid family leave, and your FMLA, they're all going to interact. And so you change one, you got to look at all the others. So with that said, I think go ahead, Mike.
One thing I will add, and I want to be respectful of time, but I do want to just warn people of this. It's okay to change the designation. You may not know something was sick leave right out of the box, and you counted it in PTO. It's okay to change it. Remember when we had that COVID leave we had to comply with. We may not have known. So just remember, it's okay to change the designation if you learn more information.
Yep, that's a great point. Mike. Thanks. So, all right. So, sorry, everyone. We went a little long, but I think there was a great discussion, Mike, on those policies. There's so much there. So, again, we will thank you all for joining us. Check us out on Spotify and other places. And our producer's going to kill me for saying it that way. But please let us know what you want to hear about, what you want to talk about. Ask your questions, and please join us for our next episode. I think, Mike, would you agree? We still have a lot to talk about with handbooks.
We do. And it will be maybe two more. Just the way we're going. Because honestly, folks, Rosemary and I have been doing this between the two of us probably almost 70 years. Yeah. So we have a lot to tell you, and we want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks, and we'll see you down the road on the next episode. Thanks, Mike.
Take care, Rosemary.
The Labor and Employment Podcast is available on BarclayDamon.com, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms. Be sure to like, follow, and stay connected for future episodes.